Busan African people, welcome back. I'm going to do a video today about a touchy subject for some black people, which is embracing racism, and how that is going to lead us to where we are supposed to be and where we used to be as a people and as a culture. So we just want to go ahead and hop into it because we have notes and we got a lot to unpack. So yeah.
So the title of this video is Racism, A Path to African Power. And the first thing we want to address is the matter of definitions. Because definitions are always important, because whoever controls the definitions of words also controls the behavior of the people and how they perceive things.
Right.
So we can't let whites define words for us. White definitions benefit white people, and African definitions benefit African people. And the classic example I like to give is if we compare the definitions of human. So for white people, the definition of human is purely biological. It's just a person with 10 fingers, 10 toes, walks upright, has a central nervous system, can speak, has a language. But for Africans, the definition of human is far more spiritual. For the African, or what we call a muntu, that's a human being, the African equivalent. This is an individual who is acutely aware of their position within a cosmic order of things. So they have a certain way of relating to others, they have a certain way of relating to nature, and they have a certain way of relating to their creator. So when we're talking about African concepts of human, it's very different from the strictly biological definition that whites give us. And in the same way we can make that distinction in the definition of humanity, we also should make that distinction in terms of how we define racism.
And everything we do, really.
And everything we do, because again, once we take ownership of the definitions, we're taking ownership over how we behave and how we relate to the universe around us.
Right.
So the first point we are making is that race is a physical indicator of culture. Therefore, racism, properly defined, is the elevation of your culture over the culture of your enemies.
Yes.
So, go ahead.
So I was just going to say, this is why we have to get away from saying, black people, we can't be racist, and we, that's only white people. It's prejudice plus power. And it's like, well, don't you want power?
Right.
Do you not want power? Because if you don't want power, then that argument makes sense. But for us, we know Africans have power, and we've seen it in history. So for us, we think it's important. We know it's important to be able to stand strong in that, and don't let white people bully you into thinking that being racist is counterproductive, because it's the only thing that's going to get us back to where we need to be.
Right, and one thing we have to highlight is, so I said race is a physical indicator of culture. So this basically means when we're talking about race, we usually think of like phenotype, skin tone, how the nose look, how the lips look, how the hair looks. But notice there's a correlation, meaning usually the people who have the same, in fact always, the people who have the same phenotype also have the same culture. So race is just a physical, an external indicator of culture. So whenever we're talking about race, we're subliminally talking about culture.
Right.
So to be a racist, that's basically saying I'm a culturalist, meaning I'm saying my culture is superior.
It's superior, right.
And if you look throughout history, whether you're looking at the Greeks, the Romans, the Chinese, the Arabs, whatever group you want to name, the reason they've been able to accumulate power is because they've been able to privilege their culture at the expense of others.
Even if it's not better.
Right, even if it's not better.
They just use propaganda to present it as that. Right. But they know the importance of saying my culture is superior to yours.
Right, so we have to ask ourselves as African people, if we're combating a xenophobic people, meaning a people who hate difference, how does it serve us not to be racist? In the sense that how does it serve us not to think of our culture as superior to their culture, especially when you have historical evidence to demonstrate the superiority of African culture. And until we come into knowledge of the fact that the African culture is fundamentally superior to the culture of non-Africans, we will always be in a position of subordination, always in a position of powerlessness.
Notice my husband said superior, not equal.
Yes.
Not equal.
Yes.
Superior.
Superior. And in these, as we go through these points, we'll give evidence to demonstrate how the African culture is superior to the culture of non-Africans. So point number 2 is racism with Africans is fundamentally distinct from that practiced by non-Africans. While non-African racism is built upon genocide and conquest, African racism is built upon protection of indigenous wealth. the geographic and demographic origins of non-Africans obligates them to be genocidal. The geographic and demographic origins of Africans obligates us to be protective.
Yes.
So one historical example of this is the Mosi Kingdom, and this is something Dr. Chancellor Williams talks about. And they had something called the Creed, and the Creed says the first white person to enter the Mosi Kingdom will spell the destruction of our kingdom. Now that was by modern standards a racist doctrine, but what has to be noted is by following that doctrine, the Mosi Kingdom was able to survive for centuries. And it was only when they was infiltrated by one white person, a white person from France, did their kingdom fall apart.
A mulatto.
A mulatto. First named George Eckham Ferguson, and after the mulatto came, then came the real enemy, the Yorugus.
Right.
And when the Yorugus came, the creed was fulfilled, and the kingdom was in ruin. So we have to look at that policy of our ancestors as not something to be shied away from or to be demonized, but something to be learned from, something to be championed as an act of self-preservation.
Right, because we were the first racists.
Yes, we
everything
was the
we
first
did
racists.
first.
Yes. Yes.
But we practiced that, and that was how our cultures and our civilizations were able to last longer than any other people on the face of the earth.
And by the same token, I said, okay, the demographic and geographic origins of Yorugu obligates them to be genocidal.
Yes.
And what does that mean? When we're talking about Yorugu, we have to understand this is a global minority. Not just a global minority, a recessive global minority who originated in the part of the world that was resource poor. When you're a global recessive minority and you're in a resource poor environment, you have to invade territories that are abundant in order to survive.
What else you gonna do?
That's their way of preserving themselves.
Yes.
And in the same way, if you're an African and you're born in a geographic environment of abundance, then it makes sense to what?
Protect.
Build a wall around that area to protect the resources that you have that your enemies don't. So we have to understand, look at this from a genetic historical perspective.
Yes.
Racism is always how cultures use their particular worldview to benefit themselves. That's all racism is. It has nothing to do with hatred. It has everything to do with self-preservation.
But because white people are who they are, they're Yorugus, you've seen racism that looks like lynching, that looks like redlining, that looks like killing black men and women in the streets, that looks like taking our children from us. That's what you think racism is. But oh no, that is not what racism is. That's just how they display their racism. But in our hands, racism doesn't look like how they do it. For us, racism looks like protect. For us, racism looks like, no, you're not allowed in my house. No, you're not allowed around my children. No, you're not allowed in my country. That's what racism looks like, because of your culture is inferior to mine. And I've seen what you've done. I've seen who you slaughtered, and they all look like me. I've seen what you've done, so you're irredeemable now. That's all this is. And
racism for Africans is 18,000 years of Kemetic civilization that began to crumble with the invasion of those of ignoble birth, as they called the Hyksos from the north. That was a racist statement. They said they are ignoble birth. Not they don't like how they behave. No, they're saying the place from which they originate is ignoble, meaning it is of low, it is a place of very depraved origins. It's a place of poverty and destitution. That's what a racist mentality through the African lens looks like. Racist mentality through the African lens says anybody with white skin is unfit for life and should be slaughtered. As Sheikh Anta Diop said in African Origins of Civilization, that is the African form of racism.
Absolutely.
And that's a form of racism that we have to reclaim if we wish to prosper as a people. Okay? So point number 3, whites call black people racist to stand between them and their cultural power. We should embrace the label of racist as a goal to aspire to and not a stigma to reject. Okay, so you want to speak
So this is important. This is very important because we've mentioned this before when we talk about when white people tell black people in America to go back to Africa. They say that because they know that they've made you afraid of Africa and that you're not going to go. But it actually would benefit you if you went. But they know that you've been brainwashed. Same thing with racism. They call you racist so that you'll stay away from the thing that can make you most powerful. Practicing racism makes you powerful. And we even say that because you say it's prejudice plus power. And you have to understand who white people are. They're deceitful people. They speak with a forked tongue. So you can't go off of everything that they say. just because they say something, or just because you see them practicing something, doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't be practicing that too. Because, like I said, we've invented the concept of saying, no, you're not allowed in. No, because you look like this, because you practice this, you're not allowed in this space. And so we just have to get out of this thing that because white people want it, it's bad. No, going back to Africa is going to benefit you, and they know that. Same thing with racism. Same thing.
Yes. We have to practice a kind of cultural chauvinism. You know, meaning we're so protective of our culture that we are not going to follow the morality, the kind of moral manipulation of our enemies by falling into that trap, disowning the richness of our culture, because the richness of our culture precedes anything of white civilization. So understand, when they use words like racist in order to demonize Africans who are proud of their culture, what they're doing is they're expecting you not to know the history.
They're trying
not to know that you was the first person, as my wife said, to deny someone at the border, to deny someone entry into your space, because Africans are experts at cultivating spaces of life.
Absolutely.
And that's the only spaces that should be protected, spaces of life.
And this is why we cannot get upset when we're in their spaces and they say, no, you can't do this, no, you can't do that. Well, it's their space. Get out of their space. You see, because if you come into my space, I'm going to do the same thing.
So the next point number 4, is when proud Africans consciously own the label of racist, they are eliminating all unnecessary discussions with their enemies and psychologically preparing themselves to seize power. And this just goes to something we've experienced firsthand. A white person is only going to negotiate and talk to you as long as you don't come to the realization that you're fundamentally and irreconcilably different from them. These are people who only respond to violence. They only respond to combativeness. They don't respond to persuasion. You see, so whenever you take this persuasive approach towards your enemies, understand you're in a losing position, because these are people who can't afford to do persuasion, because again, they're a global recessive minority. And global recessive minorities need a technological edge over the global dominant majority.
Right. And before we get people in the comments that say, well, what about the good white people? And my response to that, our response to that is, if you've allowed the white person, you've given them space to prove to you that they're the good white person, then you've already failed. You've already failed. Because we have to look at white people as a collective, just like they look at us as a collective. We've always looked at them as a collective. And that's what keeps us whole. When you look at them as a collective, it doesn't matter who's nice. I don't need your niceness. Your people are, your track record is horrific. There's nothing else for us to talk about. So don't even allow the white person to try to prove to you who they aren't or who they are. You've already failed. You've already lost, because white people are a master at deception. That's what the devil, if you're a Christian, if you believe in the devil, that's what the devil is. He deceives. And that's what we've been dealing with. We've been allowing white people to prove to us, and we've been allowing them in our spaces so that they can show us, look, I'm different. I'm not like those racist white people. But it doesn't matter, because your culture, it's not you as an individual, your culture is the problem.
And we have to understand, when we open ourselves up to this kind of mental manipulation of accepting, quote, nice white people into our spaces, we're disowning the wisdom of our ancestors. Because our ancestors were the ones who said a person is a person because they belong to a people. Okay? Same thing applies with Yorugu. A Yorugu is a Yorugu because they belong to a Yorugu people. So whenever you're analyzing a person, you have to understand that person is who they are because of the people who reared them, the people who breastfed them, the people who taught them, the people who socialized them.
The environment those people came from, which was scarcity.
And just because you're seeing a particular angle of that person doesn't mean you're seeing the entirety of that person, because situations dictate how people act. So whites, they act in ways that are most advantageous to them given the situation. And if you can't control the situation, then you should not be allowing white people into your space.
Right.
None of us can control the situation. You should be acting on the orders of your people, your ancestors. And your ancestors, they made sure to control the environment so they can account for anything. You know, and even in a moment of crisis, you always had a plan of action that would protect you against your enemies.
Yes.
Because when the white person, when they're in a moment of crisis, they're going to protect their people against you. And we see that happening right now in the Ukraine with Africans in Eastern Europe who cannot get free because they're in environments that are controlled by their enemies. So we have to highlight and we have to really emphasize, we must as African people only congregate and only settle in environments that are controlled by our own people and not our enemies.
Otherwise, we're setting ourselves up and we're setting our children up for failure and destruction.
Exactly.
Can you explain what Yorugu is?
So a Yorugu,
because I know some people don't.
That's a Dogon term. There was actually a book on it written by Dr. Marimba Ani. And according to the cosmic understanding of the Dogon people, they say when Ama, which is the supreme creator, created the universe, there was a twin named Nomo. And one of the beings that came from Ama was arrogant and did not wait for Ama to finish creating it. That being was named Yorugu, and they sometimes call it the pale fox. And this Yorugu, it's defined by the fact that it's incomplete. It's forever searching for wholeness. It's forever searching for its feminine half. You know, and this is why when you look at white culture, they are very masculine, but they have no femininity, meaning they have no spiritual essence. They have no tradition of divine motherhood. And that comes from the fact that they come from an environment where might was the main way you survived. You know, the caves, the Caucasus Mountains, the raping, pillaging, murdering
of their own
mentality of their own children. This was the mentality that they were birthed with. This was their asili, or their nature. So when we're saying Yorugu, this isn't just an insult. This is a description of a cultural personality.
A better description than white. We say white just, you know. So
white is what they want us to call it.
Right.
You know, but the more accurate descriptor of our enemies is Yorugu, because when we call them Yorugu, we're highlighting that cultural distinction.
Right.
That these are people from the ice who are incomplete and who are searching for that completeness by exploiting the African. Okay?
Or pink.
Or pink, yeah. That's a more accurate color description.
Right.
They're pink. They're not white.
They're not white.
Okay? So last point we have is African supremacy is the linking of all individuals with the racial collective they belong to, and from that linkage, understanding that African people are the inheritors of a superior, hear that again, of a superior cultural, spiritual, and genetic heritage. Conversely, whites, as members of the white racial collective, are inheritors of an inferior cultural, spiritual, and genetic heritage. And this is just basically what I was just talking about. You have to look at the genetic, cultural origins of a people to dictate what kind of people are these,
and
what are they made of.
Exactly. And for us, when we were studying, because we went into this studying African people, and the more we study African people, we couldn't help but study who was trying to destroy these people, because we're like, well, these people, they had everything. They had all these amazing civilizations that lasted this long. Who were these people that just wanted them to be destroyed so badly? And when we started just actually studying intensely white people, Yorugu, pink people, that's when we were like, oh, okay, so it starts to make sense. You have to study your enemies. We say that, we've said that in numerous videos. We don't just study African culture. We study our enemies, because in studying them, we understand what we're not, and that's extremely powerful to know what you're not, and that makes you put yourself in positions where they're not in your vicinity.
Right. We must study our enemies religiously. That means
yes.
we must study them without cease. You know, unceasingly. We must study them. And one of the, if you want, several examples you can draw between Yorugus and Africans, but one of the ones I like to focus on is child rearing. So for African people, child rearing is the center. So we formalize child rearing in systems like Kindezi, the Bantu people, where it's the art of touching and caring for children, the art of nurturing their multi-dimensional development or the spiritual development of the child. Now we have to ask, what is the child rearing philosophy of Yorugu? I'll tell you what the child rearing philosophy of Yorugu is. It's cannibalism. That's their child rearing philosophy, because their first encounter with children was as a liability. Because in the resource-poor regions of the Caucasus Mountains, every child was a liability because it threatened their survival because this was another mouth
they had to feed.
So how did they deal with this liability of the white child? They consumed them. They ate them. They set traps for them. They raped them. They murdered them.
They did.
And even when you see so-called civilizations like Rome and Greece, what you had was the systemization of pedophilia through the gymnasium system and the mentorship system, where white men would frequent gymnasiums, watch white boys work out in the nude, and then pick the boys as sex slaves.
And the ideal relationship for them is between a man and a boy. Not a man and a man.
Yes.
A man and a boy.
This
is their people saying this. This is not Africans or Asians or other people around the world. These are their own people saying this. Multiple books. Being honest about what was really happening in the ice. This is the information they don't want you to know, and this is the information when most black people come to us and ask us why we're racist, they don't know. Because if you knew what was really happening and where these people really came from, you wouldn't want to be in their vicinity. I promise you.
And I'd like to focus on this because there's the primary social unit in African civilization where all the spiritual systems and the cultural transmissions takes place is the mother-child unit. Because that's the unit where you have the cultural transmission through breastfeeding and you have the first teacher, which is the mother, teaching the child and instilling in that child principles. So by the same token, we have to analyze from an African perspective what's happening with the Yorugu between the mother and the child. Well, one, the mother in the Yorugu society abandons the baby. How much does she abandon the baby? She commits infanticide against the baby.
She kills the baby.
And she kills the baby. Not only does she kill the baby, when she's not killing the baby, she abandons it to the point that the baby now has to nurse from donkeys and goats, like they did in 18th and 19th century Europe. Romulus and Remus. This was the norm all the way up into the 1800s in Europe. White women were abandoning their babies, and these babies had to suckle from the tit of donkeys and goats. How can you get a more polar opposite from the Kendesi system of Africa? And this is the same culture that is currently trying to indoctrinate African women into thinking that they have any type of credibility in telling them how to mother their children. Understand, African people, we're taking information from our natural enemies. And until we understand that and until we own the positive racism of African self-preservation, we will continue to be under their domination.
Ashe. And you, really quick, you also see how they value their in their elders. They put their elders in nursing homes. They can't stand old people. And in Europe, when you got to 35, you were considered an elder because they didn't live past 35. And if you got to past 35, then you at that point were a god. So we have to look at how they treat their elders, their own people, their mother and their father. In African culture, the elder is revered. The elder is extremely revered.
The elder is in Desi. The elder is a teacher.
And it helps to teach the children. The white people don't want their elders in the house. They want them in the nursing home. So you see, all of these things are representative of how they value themselves. If they don't value themselves, their own mother and their own father and their own babies that they consume and eat, it don't look good for you.
So by highlighting all this, what we're trying to get our brothers and sisters to do is, when you're trying to make an analysis of a people, look at their family dynamics. Look at the cultural dynamics. Because the cultural dynamics is going to tell you far more than the material disparities. And that's what white people have cleverly done. Because they've been such expert thieves and murderers, stealing the resources of the world, stealing the raw materials of the world, colonizing the world to build nuclear weapons and computers and intercontinental missiles and all these nuclear weapons. Because they've been able to create this technology, they want you to be bamboozled into thinking that this technological advancement is somehow more important than the moral advancement. But African people have always been the moral exemplars of the world. And they remain the moral exemplars of the world, and morality always beats material. I don't care what the Yorugu say, what their Western science says, morality will always win. And when we understand that, it will spell the end of our enemies.
So stop rejecting being racist. Embrace it. Embrace it. It's a compliment if a white person calls you racist. Also, you can just think about the fact that Europeans, Yorugu, created a whole race of people by rape. What people were created out of rape from Africans? There are none, because that's not what we do. So just that, it's so many things, just those things alone, isolated, should make them irredeemable. Don't speak. You shouldn't be talking. You learn that from us as well. Everything they do, they learn from us. They mimic. I'm just putting that out there so for you to think about what race of people were created out of rape in Africa.
Yes, and if you really want to know who Yurugus are, ask the Tasmanians. Oh yeah, they don't exist because they always
genocided them out
completely. You know, we talk about the Jewish Holocaust. What about the Tasmanians? There's no more Tasmanians to say never again, because they did it one time and they was all gone. Okay?
But 2 Jews died. And now the whole world has to stop. But in Congo, when our ancestors were being slaughtered by Leopold, more than that happened in with the Johnny Come Lately.
10 million.
Now, what? So, don't let Europeans dictate what you value. You dictate what you value. Don't be talking about no Holocaust to me.
So just to further support what we're saying, I'm now just going to show a list of books that I recommend our brothers and sisters read to further deepen their commitment to African people and their hostility to their enemies, which is Yoruba.
Okay.
And these books should inculcate within our people a healthy, positive racism, the racism of self-preservation. So the first book I want to point out is a book written by Dr. Bobby Wright, and it's called The Psychopathic Racial Personality. Okay? Now I'll go through these quickly. The second book is called The ISIS Papers, and this is by Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. The third book is called Your Reason by Mwalimu Baruti. Okay?
You can hand this to me later on.
The fourth book is called Epidemics in Society by Frank M. Snowden. Okay? The fifth book is called Yurugu, an African-centered critique of European cultural thought and behavior by Dr. Marimba Ani. The next book is Western Sexuality, Practice and Precept in Past and Present Times by Philippe Aries and Andre Bagini.
And that's written by a Yurugu,
Yes.
and this one that isn't written by Yurugu. I thought it was.
Yes. The ones written by Yurugu is this one. This is written by...
That's the only one.
That's the only one.
Yeah.
The next one is Homosexuality and the Effeminization of African Males, again by Mwalimu Baruti. And there's 2 other books that I don't have physically, but you can find them in ebook form. And that's Iceman Inheritance by Michael Bradley, a Yurugu, and another by another Yurugu called Dirt. And this is written by an author by the name of Terrence McLaughlin. Okay, so all of these books, they're extremely important in giving us a historical context so that when we analyze and attack our enemies, we're equipped with our African sense so that we can deflect any type of mental manipulation that they have for us in saying what we're saying is racist. No, this isn't racism in their sense. This is racism in the sense of conscious, intelligent self-preservation based on African cultural values.
Right.
Okay?
All right. Thank y'all for watching. BB for Hodie.